Anyway, and Bill White distinguished himself as mayor of Houston. Prior to that, worked in the Clinton administration, was one of the great plaintiffs lawyers in Houston before that, and he's and obviously a great one because they're all giving him money. But so, and I would have bought that airline thing if I hadn't seen his King Air earlier in the day. But anyway. You can start the clock now, Brian. Oh, one other person, Susan King over here. Susan King saved my dog. My dog, in the middle of a hearing that we were having, started having puppies. I got called out of the hearing. Susan birthed the dogs. I'm sure the fact that the dog died a year later had nothing to do with what happened here. Okay, Brian.
Time's up.
One of the things, thank you for having us here. We all appreciate the opportunity to be here. To have a great America, you got to balance the budget. I mean, it is a boring subject. Nobody wants to do it. But it is the same thing that happened in the state of Texas in 1991 on a much smaller scale. In 1991, the Lieutenant Governor of Texas, Bob Bullock, stood up, said we ought to have an income tax in Texas. That's the only way we can get out of this mess. We decided that wasn't a good idea. We created the Texas Performance Review. We completely revamped food stamps. You know what we found in food stamps? We found a guy in New York making $81 million a year printing food stamps. We found a guy in Omaha, Nebraska charging you $37 million a year to haul them around in armored cars. We found dozens of businesses that were making tons of money by overcharging the state for distribution centers. And when we put the little card in that simplified the whole process, their argument to the folks in the legislature was, you can't use an ATM card. Poor people can't figure out how to operate that. And my response was, they're poor. They're not stupid. And we wound up putting the system in. The day we put it in, hundreds of thousands of people left the food stamp rolls. We went and tried to figure out what happened. And what happened was when you send them the card, and you know how you have to call in and get your ATM number and give all the vital information, what we found was dead people can't use telephones. And that's what happened. That happens on a massive scale in Washington, D.C. And you got to figure out a way to balance the budget. Now, what happens to you guys is pretty simple. You got one party that sides with insurance companies, and you got another party that sides with trial lawyers. And you're stuck in the middle. And both parties go their separate ways, and there are very few in the middle that stick with you. I stick with you. I always have stuck with you. One of the things that John Tower, Lloyd Benson, and Lyndon Johnson all had in common is that at some time, either during or after their terms, they said, it is in Texas' interest to have one of each in the United States Senate. When those caucuses, Washington's a horrible place. It's the most partisan place in the world. And no matter what you think about Kay Hutchison or John Cornyn, when there is a meeting on health care in the caucus that rules the place, there are no Texans in that room. There are no Texans in the room when they talk about Fort Hood. There are no Texans in the room when they're talking about my cousin. There are no Texans in the room when they're talking about any of these things. And I ask you to put a Texan in the room. And if you're going to put a Democrat in the room, put one that's been for you. And I know how embarrassing it is. I know how embarrassing it is to go to the country club and have a damn Democratic bumper sticker on your car. And your spouse is sitting there going, how are we going to explain that? I think Jimmy Joe saw us. What are we going to say? I'll tell you how you explain it. If you want to keep living like a Republican, you better vote for this Democrat. That's it.
I'd love to hear his inaugural address. I'm sorry, Michael, you've got to follow it.
That's all right. That's all right. John, thank you. Thank you for lighting them up for me. You know, I want to go back and tell another two stories about my life, again, as a way of introduction. You know, back in 1986, I was a 33-year-old prosecutor in the Reagan Justice Department, United States Department of Justice in Washington, D.C. I was a young man who was assigned the case, the United States of America versus 5 members of the Carolina Knights of the KKK. I'd indicted them for conspiring to obtain stolen military weapons from Fort Bragg and other military installations across the country. And if you go to the records of the United States Senate, it will say that the Carolina Knights of the KKK was the largest and perhaps the most violent white supremacist organization in the country. It would also say that I tried those cases at no small risk to myself. Individuals who had done harm to others in the past had put a death warrant out against me. As a matter of fact, the last two cases I tried under the heavy protection of federal agents. And at the end of the day, those 5 individuals got a free trip to a federal institution of higher learning. 4 years later, I had the occasion as Assistant Secretary of Education under the first President Bush, same position that Justice Clarence Thomas had under President Ronald Reagan, to issue a directive to our colleges and universities that said, stop assigning admitting youngsters in your schools, and stop assigning financial aid dollars based upon one's bloodline. The New York Times said it was a frontal assault on race-based affirmative action, and it was. Now, why did I tell you that story? Why did I tell both of those? I got up here at the beginning and said that as I go around the state, folks are saying they want consistent conservatives who have the courage to stand up in Washington. And I have to think that what was flowing through the vein of that 33-year-old kid and was also in the veins of that 37-year-old one is still in this guy here at 56. I have to think that that's the kind of courage that we need in order to cut spending. But you say, Michael, you guys always talk about cutting spending, but you never do it. When I became a member of the Railroad Commission of Texas, we had more than 900 employees. We have less than 700 today because we took seriously the notion of controlling spending. I have to say that I'm thankful to the members of the legislature that back in 2005 and 2007, they gave us a combined pay increase such that our pay was increased $45,000 per year. And I've turned down every penny of it because it's a whole lot easier to make the case to control spending when I'm not sticking my own finger in the till. But there's another reason. Some of you have had the occasion this evening to meet my wife. Absolutely gorgeous and enormously talented. And even if I had taken the pay raise, I wouldn't be the breadwinner in the family. So, but that's what it's going to take in order for us to cut spending, control the deficit, for us to go about the business to transform the tax code, to inspire the next generation of scientists and technologists and engineers and mathematicians, for us to welcome immigrants but control that border with a combination of a physical fence and technology and boots on the ground. That's what it's going to take for us to go about the business of giving youngsters in this country the same thing that my father and my mother gave me, was the sense that we could be anything we want to be, that we've got to turn victimhood into victory. And when I go to Washington, I go recognizing that you sent me to work for you and to carry your values and your principles to Washington and to go about the business of bold action to turn this country around. May the peace of the Lord be with you. May God bless you. May God bless Texas.
Ladies and gentlemen, I've never run for statewide office. Well, I did for 2 weeks one time. But I got a big taste of it in that 2 weeks. I think we should all appreciate what these people have put themselves on the line for. I once heard that the best person doesn't always win an election because usually the best person doesn't run. But let me tell you, that ain't the case here. I've served with all of these people, and you have an outstanding group to choose from. I hope you, after you get a little taste of what they are talking about, this is so unfair because it's so hard to cram all of this heavy lifting in these 5-minute intervals. But I want you to know that they're laying it all on the line for you, and I hope you'll show your appreciation one more time for this whole panel.